Yo, yo, you are listening to Peterborough Politics Podcast. This is episode 10, and we are your hosts. My name is Danny Taro, aka my homie Tutaro, and I'm joined with our wonderful editor of the Arthur newspaper.
Hello, I am Sebastian Johnston-Lindsay, still the editor-in-chief at Arthur newspaper.
Congratulations, Sebastian, on winning re election. The job at the Arthur is kind of precarious because you have to get re-elected as if you're a politician every year.
Yeah, yeah, it keeps us honest, which is good. As a nonprofit, it's good that there's no one at the top to just kind of run things, uh, year over year
Except
over
me.
year, except you. See, it's
That's
good
right.
to have like that institutional memory as well, because then when we're filling out things like the Canada Summer Jobs application, we know that you're going to be there.
It
And then
is true. It
yeah,
is true.
so we know that
Yeah,
you're always there, anchoring us year to year.
that's right.
Yeah.
Just the puppet master pulling the strings behind the scenes, you could even
Yeah.
say.
See, it's a huge illusion. It's actually Danny who's in charge. It's not the board. It's not me. It's Danny.
That's
Danny.
right.
It was
That's right.
Danny the whole time.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And I would
Charge
have
of
gotten
Arthur.
away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling student journalists.
Yeah. Yeah. Underestimate us. We're on to you.
That's
You
right.
know. Yeah.
We have a wonderful show for everyone today. Lots to talk about. We're going to talk about our new poet laureate, Zisa von Bieberstein. We're going to talk about a PCVS theatrical production, which is amazing to hear about. We're going to talk about the Peterborough Chamber of Commerce, who is making moves trying to pressure Peterborough Council on certain issues. We're going to talk about tiny homes. We're going to talk about trail lighting. And we're going to talk about a new apartment building. But I feel like the highlight of this episode here is that City Council made another weird move about naloxone.
Yeah. This is just the continuing saga of city councilors. I feel like they don't really understand what's being proposed in this instance. I feel like a lot of them feel like this policy would like coerce city staff into administering naloxone, where
Yeah.
the policy and the outlines, the alternative recommendations that they voted down earlier on this month, and at no point has it ever been the case that city workers are going to be compelled to um, administer naloxone or carry naloxone. This is literally
Yes.
just about empowering them and allowing them to do so in the instance um, where they encounter someone who is experiencing an opioid overdose, right? And so
For sure.
it's just another tale of stigmatization. It's there were so many really compelling delegations who came and spoke to council, and to still have this end result, um, wherein city workers are not allowed to administer naloxone while on the job. It's just endangering lives, and it's stigmatizing people who use drugs, whether recreationally, whether as a matter of having a prescription, you know, or people who have substance abuse disorders, right? Like it's just stigmatizing every single segment of the population, right? It's
Yeah.
deeply deeply upsetting.
It seemed like there was a lot of like misinformation, and we even had some high profile people calling out city staff and
Yeah.
saying like, why are you including what is essentially misinformation about these issues in your information that you're giving to counselors, because they're basing their decisions on that. And it just seems like there's, again, something we pointed out last week, there's stigma from kind of all levels going on here. The only
Mhm.
people I don't hear saying, hey, this is bad, are the Peterborough Three, which is to say Alex Bierk, Joy LaChica, and
Matt Crowley.
Mac Crowley. Yeah, sorry,
There you go.
I was having a moment there.
Friend of the pod.
That's right, the friend of the pod, yeah, Matt Crowley. And it's like they once again were the only three voices who were kind of like the voice of reason here, saying that why don't we do this very obvious safety measure that is going to save lives?
Yeah, and I think like all of the delegations really spoke to the idea of the misinformation that was being spread in the staff report. But I think one of the most like pointed and powerful ones came from, Dr. Thomas Pigott, our medical officer of health here in Peterborough. And he spoke very like one of the big points that he talked about was this idea that somehow administering naloxone could be traumatizing for the person doing it. And he spoke from the point of view of someone who's worked in like combat zones, like in the Democratic Republic of Congo with Doctors Without Borders. And he spoke that so often, like in his like while studying these kinds of things and experiencing it himself, like so often it's the idea that you can't help someone in a situation that's more traumatizing, this moral trauma that comes along with not being able to act in so many situations, right? And so by
Yeah.
handcuffing city staff, city workers to not be able to help people in a crisis can, in some instances, be more traumatizing than the actual experience of attempting to save a life. And then he also spoke a lot about like the idea, like we talked about this last week, like that somehow having more naloxone kits available is somehow going to increase the amount of drug use in public spaces. I mean, even repeating
Yeah.
that right now feels a little bit dirty, but like needless to say, that is not the case. There's no evidence supporting that. And then but he kind of took like city staff to task here, and we're like, there's a lot of there's a huge issue when public bodies don't act like in order to sort of rectify these situations, or don't act with like a sort of moral authority to move forward with progressive measures, because it kind of allows for other like business owners and businesses in the city to kind of do the same thing, to not act, right? Whereas if the city was to be seen as like a moral like sort of vanguard leading the way in these kinds of things, it would encourage more people to understand and learn more about the fact that you know the people who are experience overdose are not, like again, like there's no, we shouldn't have one idea of what a person who experiences overdose is, right? Like there's so many instances where
Yeah.
people who are prescribed opioids experience overdose, and there needs to be help for them too. There needs to be help for anyone, because the number that kept coming up was like there's approximately like 13% of the workforce has been prescribed opioids in the past 12 months, and approximately 9% of those people have are using non-prescription opioids, right? So like again, like the figures of 1 in 10, right, when it comes to like people who live with substance abuse disorders, right, or addiction. But
Right.
we can't just talk about that. We have to talk about the people who are being prescribed opioids by doctors as well, and the fact that you know overdose happens.
Stigma.
Stigma, it's all stigma. Like it's trying to break down the idea of what someone who experiences overdose looks like. And again, the issue that keeps coming up is that that person's life just isn't valued by 8 people at City Hall, apparently.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to just call out the city staff as well, because like they
Yeah,
are failing us in this regard.
yeah,
And it's sometimes I do feel it is unfair to always be blaming the people who were democratically elected. I don't know if any of the city staff listen to this show at all, but I would encourage them to, reconsider what is going on here. The idea that 60 people died last year due to overdose, and 23 people already in 2023 have died from drug poisoning, and that we're just going to sit on our hands here and not even do what is like a bare minimum. As you say, I think I would be more traumatized knowing that I could have done essential naloxone training, but the city council opted out of that for that training for myself as a city employee. I think I would be more traumatized by the fact that I did nothing and I allowed somebody to die right in front of my eyes,
yeah,
rather than saving their life with a very simple, like 15-minute training.
yeah. And I mean, the thing to bear in mind here too is like the counselors who voted against like allowing or to create policy in order to allow for city workers to administer naloxone, would be very quick to point out, well, city workers can still take naloxone training. And in fact, they would encourage them. Like Leslie Parnell is very open about the fact that she took the training and she carries naloxone,
Yeah.
right? But she sees a difference, and this all has to do with liability, which draws a whole other number of questions like surrounding exactly what's going on there, because it's very unclear, like
Yeah.
municipality to municipality, right? But it's like a matter of just, moral leadership and being able to just like step up and do the right thing in order to allow for a greater destigmatization and greater sort of public education on the benefits of, combating what is an ongoing drug poisoning crisis and
Yeah.
opioid crisis within our community. And there's just so much here to kind of unpack. Like when we talk a lot about like the deaths that have been experienced, but like so many of the delegations also spoke to the fact that, like, while death is like the most, obviously that's the worst case scenario in these situations, every single second counts and someone stops breathing as a result of an opioid overdose, right? Like every single second. And that's so often
Yeah.
what occurs in the 5 minutes that on average that it takes for paramedics to arrive on the scene is the brain starts to die, right, due to lack of
Right.
oxygen, right? So you end up with people who, as a result of experiencing overdose, are now living with brain injury, right, or like brain damage as a result of this, right? So there's and then that has a carryover effect and like a long-term effect on the general health of the community. So there's so many different ways in which this affects the community, besides like obviously the worst case scenario of city workers having to watch people die. you know
Yeah.
like that's it's inhumane in so many different respects. And then to have, like Kevin DeGay saying that he doesn't see anything in here that would misinform him as a counselor, when he just had the medical officer of health come in here and say, no, this is disinformation. Like
Yeah.
I like, again, I don't want to, like, I believe the doctor. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to believe the man who has, devoted his life to, public health research and and medicine over a city councilor, in terms of like what has more um value in terms of like the information that we're being talked,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, a
Like,
super idiotic thing to say, I would have to
yeah,
say. It's like, and really concerning that you wouldn't even be approaching these documents that you're receiving with a certain level of skepticism.
yeah,
Like, I'm like, how do we get documents in front of Kevin Dugay? Because I can whip one up right now, that clarifies this misinformation, and I'm pretty sure he considers everything he reads like verbatim without putting any critical thought into it. So, like, how do we get some
apparently.
documents in front of him? Because I feel like it shouldn't be that hard to change his mind, since there's no critical thinking going on there.
No, no. And like the thing that he also said too is he was very, he asked a lot of the during discussion, like there was discussion among city staff as to whether or not, like, the provincial workplace legislation, whether or not it mandates naloxone training, the ability for staff, which is kind of a ridiculous and obscene question on its face, because obviously we wouldn't be having this conversation if it was mandated, because there wouldn't be a choice. But
Yeah.
barring that, um his reaction to learning, I put that in like scare quotes, right? He didn't learn it, he was asking a rhetorical question because he knew the answer. His reaction to that was, well, unless the province does something, that I don't feel comfortable doing anything, which is the exact kind of leadership vacuum that we continue to find ourselves in this city when it comes to progressive measures, barring the Peterborough 3 that we continually refer to, you know.
Yeah. What's going on with Jeff Leal? How come he can't be a leader on this?
He was suspiciously quiet throughout this entire thing. He didn't have a whole lot to say regarding this. Of course, he was on vacation during the main discussion on this during general committee. So
Okay.
he didn't have a
All right. So,
yeah.
I guess that's the type of leadership we're getting out of Jeff Leal. There's, 60, 70 people dying a year from overdose, and he's getting his ass tan.
He was in North Carolina. I learned he was in North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. All right. Maybe there are legitimate reasons there. I feel bad making fun of him too much, but there are legitimate
No, but
reasons, and people
again,
are
like when
deserving
he,
of a vacation, but I still
yeah,
think, there should be some leadership on this. Like I want a mayor who's going to be like stand up and convince those more conservative leaning counselors that, hey, yeah, saving people's lives and agreeing with the chief officer of health is going to be a good move in this case, right? Like, and even if he's on vacation, he should at least be following this, and I think voting with the Peterborough 3.
mhm, yeah. I should
There's a
correct
lot of
myself.
stigma.
He was there at the original committee meeting. It was Gary Baldwin who wasn't there. That there's a lot of counselors who were away. But
Okay.
exactly, yeah, no, he should be. He needs to be. Yeah, there needs to be more leadership in that respect. Like it's stunning. I don't know.
Yeah, it is pretty disappointing, and as someone pointing out in chat is like, it's really seems like he's more of a conservative than someone we would even consider like a progressive person who's part of the Liberal Party. Like he's definitely shown that he's, I think, a conservative in many regards, which is disappointing. I'm not sure if that's what the people who were voting for him had in mind when he was elected.
Yeah, no, I mean he's a straight up Ontario uh liberal, which is to say,
A
centrist who will
conservative.
who yeah who will go whichever way the wind blows on a lot of things. And yeah, can
Yeah,
liberal in like the original meaning of the word, which is what we would widely consider conservative these days. Yeah, absolutely.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, definitely not a
Um,
progressive. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that much has been evident already. However, credit where it's due, I suppose, because I think Jeff Leo was quite integral with helping secure a location for the tiny home community, which is being done by Path.
Mhm.
Have you heard about this?
I have heard about this. Yeah, this I haven't looked a lot into it, but yeah, I have. And this is
Yeah,
good because, of course, this kind of follows out of some decisions that council voted against uh, chose not to support back in the final meetings of the year in 2022. So this is good. It's good to see that they're doing this without, to this point, anyways. I think there's something coming down the line in terms of city support, but it's good to see that um, these organizations are able to work, continue the good work that they're doing in a way that doesn't depend upon uh, city support, because I don't think that hasn't been forthcoming yet. But there's a teaser
right.
in
Yeah.
the article that we're looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, it's saying here that Jeff Leal, the mayor, was the person who tipped off the organization about the Humane Society property. So it is they've moved to land, or they are going to potentially have a space here at Lansdowne Street East,
Mhm.
and could see 30 units established by 2024. So this is coming also from the Peterborough Action for Tiny Homes, which is PATH. And, it's been kind of a long time coming because they've been searching for a location to house people with tiny homes. Now, keeping in mind, too, that this is just like a bit of a band aid solution, but possibly a very important one. And the program is meant to transition people from being unhoused to having a tiny home and space there, and then eventually, hopefully, finding secure housing. So these tiny homes, they are able to house a single person, and it is hopefully something that can function in favor of addressing the unhoused crisis in Peterborough. Alex Bierk said that these are the kind of ideas that we need to support. We have a plan coming to council on May 8th that's going to happen adjacent to what's happening here to address some of the issues happening with people who are unhoused, people who are living outside. And the more resources we can put into meeting people's needs, those are the types of reactions that will create an impact. So good news. It sounds like something. It is nice to see some progress along these lines, but again, I think emphasizing that like it's not enough, and it's not necessarily addressing like the root of the problem. But we will take this as a victory.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I mean, there needs to be more done. It's heartening to see that, city staff has been like sort of supporting this to a certain degree. It would have been nice to see like financial support from council initially to sort of get some of these projects off the ground sooner so that they would have a little bit more of a footing to stand on. I saw that there was a question in the chat too about what like the future use of this, like once this kind of gets off the ground, and like what happens when they want to actually use the property. And I saw like in a global news story that they're looking at like building what are essentially like affordable housing condos with like commercial space on the bottom as well at some point, like somewhere down the road, like over a three
Okay,
or four year
on
span.
this same property.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what they said during in that story. But yeah, it seems like that's a few years down the road, and they still need to look to the city for rezoning and in order to actually begin this kind of work. But hopefully,
Right.
hopefully this isn't another scenario where this comes to council and it's another 8-3 vote, or 7-4 vote or something
Yeah.
along those lines. Like hopefully this just kind of goes through, that the wheels have been greased enough to kind of get this through, like because
Right.
these like the spot to find the tiny homes has been ongoing since before I started covering council, but it was one of the first issues that was, and we talked to Alex about this last week, right? It was one of the first motions that he brought forward, was to kind of push this through and like find a place for Path to set up the tiny homes, right? And for the city to fund it as well.
Yeah.
Um, um, but
So yeah,
so it's
you're right though. Like disappointing that Mayor Jeff Leal did not support this originally, but is now just supporting by finding a potential location. It's almost as if he like wants to appear as though he's doing something without actually committing any of the resources of city council towards it. So definitely some skepticism is deserved there. And yeah, I agree. It is potentially just like setting us up for a crisis when in 3 years, when Habitat or whoever wants to develop this property, are these tiny homes still going to exist there? Will they have found a permanent place for these tiny homes by then? Um, so yeah, maybe this is like again a band-aid that is not even a permanent band-aid, which is kind of concerning as well. So it is frustrating because I feel like, oh, we're getting some progress, but maybe this will be used by city council, by the community here, to once again say, well, we're doing enough and we don't need to do more. um so as the although I'm excited about this, I find myself a little still skeptical of the situation. I do worry that this will be something that becomes a focal point for the issue in 3 years, because suddenly we might find out that these tiny homes and the people who live in them are being evicted or need to move. And I can't help but think that this is just going to be a crisis in the future. It's like we're deferring the crisis for a couple of years down the road, and we're still going to be in the crisis ongoing as well, because this is not an actual solution that's going to help in like a fundamental way.
exactly, yeah, it is like you say, like a sort of temporary band-aid solution. That doesn't exactly like address like the root causes of like housing unaffordability. It's helping people who are already experiencing housing insecurity and accept like can't access housing. It really does nothing to address people who continue to fall into that situation through no fault of their own, right? I mean, It's
Yeah.
just an untenable social situation that we kind of find ourselves in as a result of, you know, unfettered capitalism.
That's right. Yeah. Um, and we do. I mean, like, we should maybe move on to like some exciting news. I feel like the news around like art and culture is always a bit more exciting. So, we do have a new poet laureate, something we mentioned in the past. Um, and it's Zisa von Bieberstein. I was really excited to hear that they had addressed council on this past Monday, and they brought attention to something I think is quite important, which is the Peterborough Public Library, and specifically that they are continuing to do drag story time in the face of protests. This is something that has kind of, obviously, if you're in tune with the news, I wouldn't even call them protests so much as hate rallies, because what they are essentially calling for is for trans people and drag queens to not exist, or at the very least not exist in public, which obviously is the same thing. So I was really happy to hear Zisa bring attention to that specifically, and excited that we have a poet laureate. I know, as someone who is part of the poetry community historically, how important it is to have someone who is essentially very in tune with certain issues, especially when it comes to social justice. The fact that they have a position, albeit even a small position, it is great that they get to be someone who addresses city council and can raise awareness about certain issues that are plaguing our community. So I'm excited for it, and there is a poetry slam coming up on, I believe, the date is escaping me.
I
Um,
think it might be tomorrow.
Tomorrow, Thursday, the
27th.
27th. Oh my goodness, it's tomorrow at
Yeah.
Sadler House. Yeah,
Mhm.
so April 27th. And then there's also another event happening on May 11th, I believe. Um, which is we have a couple poetry slams going down. Something that I think is like sorely missed and definitely needed. The poetry slam for me has also been a way to like for people to express and process trauma, as well as to like heal as a community. So something I think we've really kind of missed during the pandemic when we were not able to meet, and I'm glad to see that they are taking precautions for a success accessibility as well, and encouraging people to mask at those events or holding them outdoors. So that is exciting. In other artistic news, there is a play coming out about PCVS and the protest that went on in when students and the community was trying to save PCVS. So that I think is really kind of amazing, and showing that the legacy of those activists is something that's going to be almost embedded into the Peterborough arts community. There is a play. It was uh, developed or written by Madeline Brown, someone who was never a student at PCVS, which is Peterborough Collegiate and Vocational School, but they were inspired by the battle to rescue the school downtown. Now, PCVS is long considered one of the missteps of the development of Peterborough, because it took a lot of, unfortunately, I think, like, young people out of the downtown core, and I think downtown Peterborough has suffered for that, and it was considered kind of like a more artistic school as well. So the production, called Give 'em Hell, um tickets I think are available now, and it's being put on by um what is it?
The Fourth Line Theater.
Fourth Line Theater. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is exciting. I want to go check it out.
Yeah. I think yeah, there's a few shows. Looks like in mid-September. So the opening night is the 15th. So
Okay, so better get your tickets now. It sounds like
Yeah,
there's going to be a limited space if you want to go see that production.
yeah, it sounds really, really great. As someone who was not here during all of that, I know a lot of people who went to PCBS, so sounds like
Yeah.
sounds like it'll be good.
Yeah, for sure. Um what about we got a couple more things we can talk about. Oh yeah, when I was thinking about downtown businesses in Peterborough, it
Hmm.
reminded me that the Chamber of Commerce is calling for transit investments, saying that bus cancellations are hurting local businesses. Now, this is an article coming out of Peterborough Currents,
Yes.
which is fantastic. I support them, and I would encourage other folks to support their journalism, um, because they're independent community journalists. And the shocking thing to me about this article is that it really interviews people who are essentially part of like the petite bourgeoisie, business owners who are saying that, please, for the life of God, for the sake of my business, invest in transit so that my employees can come to work and be at work on time. And I thought that this is just such an interesting framing, because so often we don't frame issues on behalf of the working class, but actually the people who are business owners. So this really goes to show how badly we need transit, and it's not just for the workers, but it's actually for the elite class as well, because they're the ones who employ all of us, I suppose. And even the Kawartha Chamber of Commerce begging Peterborough City Council to take action.
It's amazing to see this, eh? Who would have thought that business owners would have a vested interest in having their staff show up to work on time, but it turns out it's true. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was talking to Brett through who wrote this article here and for Peterborough Currents, and it was such a nice it's such a it, yeah, Peterborough Currents just has a way of like finding stories and then just like telling it from a perspective that just brings such a delightful kind of um I don't know, it's unexpected to a certain degree. But then, of course, this is based on and reporting on a letter that the Peterborough Chamber of Commerce like wrote to the city, kind of like an open letter saying, "Hey, look, they cite the fact that there's like 30 to 50% of their workforce depends on public transit to get to work, which is a lot of people, right? And now they're having issues
Yeah.
um, keeping staff because people are looking for jobs that are closer to home, that they don't have to commute into the downtown to get to, right? Because they don't want to depend upon public transit. And the timelines, the timing of the bus schedules don't line up with the shifts that their workers are having to work. And so it's just like this.
Right.
It's it really is another demonstration of like what would be in like when city staff told council that like the inevitable consequences of underfunding transit are loss of jobs in at Peterborough Transit in general, but then like the trickle down effect of like just loss of ridership, inability to maintain ridership, and this is like the flip side of that, right? Like the loss of ridership are the people who are no longer coming to work downtown, right? Like that's tied up in
Yeah.
that whole perspective, right? It wasn't like explicitly stated within council chambers when these decisions were being made to um uh I want to say cut funding, but freeze funding at 2022 levels. But this is the end result, right? And the delicious irony here of it coming from, like you say, like the the business owners, the business class within the community
Yeah.
is, because ostensibly this is who the city is so concerned about, like it's
Right.
at council, like a lot of councilors will point to like the taxpayer, right?
And what
um
they mean by that is the business class,
yeah,
because like those are their friends. Those are the people with the loudest, uh, let's say the loudest pockets.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, it seems very obvious that this would be like the end result of not like, and it just creates, again, like we're constantly working in these cycles that like create more and more, like it just funding things initially would allow for so much economic growth. Like we've talked about this in terms of the arts, right? We've talked
Yeah.
about it in terms of, various things. Like if you just help get something, make it viable, it will pay dividends, right? Like it's
Yeah.
investment. It's not burning money, it's investment in these things and investment in these people and services in order to ensure that we have a healthy, vibrant community instead of one that just isn't, that's basically dying and withering, right? Because
Right.
like what why would businesses want to set up downtown if people coming in from the north end or the south end can't get to it? There's no reason to, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly as we called it. That, investing in transit is good for the economy. Go figure. And yeah, it is. I really do love this perspective because maybe it is something that city council will be able to hear. I find part of the problem too is that the people on council, they think about running the city as if it's a business or as if it's a household, and they say, well, if we have X amount of money coming in and we better have, or sorry, going out, then we better have X amount of money coming in. And they are not really able to see like a long term vision for what is a quality investment and what is actually going to create some of that economic stimulus moving forward. So it is really frustrating. I honestly don't know what city council is thinking when it terms in terms of investing in transit, because there's all this debate about should we go back to the old system, should we move forward with the current system that we've adapted. And I mean, the honest answer is you need to choose a system and you need to properly fund it. Like it doesn't matter if it's one system or the other if you don't give it the proper funding. And that is also what the Chamber of Commerce is saying, is that you know, it doesn't matter what route network you go with, you should just fund it properly. And it's kind of refreshing, I guess, to hear finally kind of the business class, the upper echelons of Peterborough society saying, please, just like we need people to be able to get to work on time and encourage them to come to our business.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they say it best here when they close the open letter by saying investing in a more robust transit service will help employers generate economic growth, create a stronger workforce, and improve the quality of life in our community, which is exactly what we've been saying constantly, right? Here
Yeah,
and everywhere. And I try to say it in like between the lines in the reporting that I do too, that saving a dollar isn't like it you're just neglecting your community when you do that. Like it's not actually aiding in anything.
right. And it's frustrating because I genuinely feel like Peterborough should be this idyllic place because it's small enough and
Yeah.
it's wealthy enough, and we can invest in transit and we can invest in art, and for me, like what Peterborough is, it is that community where transit was reliable, largely because I grew up here as a student, and
Mhm.
and though that transit was always properly funded for me to get to where I needed to go, which was the university, right? And I also think of Peterborough as this vibrant arts community, and that to me is what Peterborough is. But I'm kind of now just getting frustrated that it's constantly this undercurrent of Peterborough, and it's this
Yeah.
this subculture that is always at odds with the status quo. And I'm like, why don't we just make this the status quo? Because we already have all of these artistic mediums here. We have theater, we have poetry, we have music, we have puppetry. We have literally every type of art you can think of going on here. And it's not even just like people who are like just okay at their art. It's like, wow, sometimes I go to shows here, it's like, wow, this should be on a national level. This is so good, and it's happening in our little town. But imagine that this was properly funded, or that this kind of like national quality artist could be allowed to flourish here and grow their art and grow the scene around their art. But it's essentially we're kind of just all left waiting for the bus, so to speak. And I feel really lucky because the other day I went to the hospital to get a checkup, and I looked at the bus schedule to get back to my neighborhood, and the only way I was going to catch the bus is if the doctor called me into the office early. And by some miracle, I got called into the office early, and of course, doctors are very busy, so it was a very quick meeting. And I got the green light, check mark. All right, I'm feeling good. I'm looking good. And I was lucky I was able to go and catch that bus. But if I didn't catch that bus from the hospital, an essential place to be, and
Mhm.
I would have had to wait an hour. At which point I would have just probably started walking or called the cab. And so either it's like, and again, not everyone has the privilege of
Exactly.
one being able-bodied and being
Yeah.
like, okay, I guess I'm going to walk for an hour and a half instead of taking a 7-minute bus ride, and also the privilege of being like, all right, I guess I'll just spend $15 to take a cab down the street, and it is ridiculous to think that this service is so underfunded, and the only way you can essentially access essential services in Peterborough is if you are privileged and able-bodied. We don't live in a just society here.
Yeah, exactly. And you took the words right out of my mouth there, because my response to that would have been like, well, how lucky both of you and I are if we found ourselves in that situation to be able to either walk or call a cab, because we are able-bodied and we have the funds to in order to buy a cab, buy a cab, not buy a cab, take a cab, but then
Yeah.
also like a cell phone that works to call a cab, or like it just trickles down, and like the so much of this just doesn't speak to like the most vulnerable people in our society who aren't able to get that leg up, right? Like being able to feasibly move around the city is something that a lot of people I take for granted, either because they um can walk or bike or drive, right? Do any of those
Yeah.
things. And that's just not the reality for so many people. And as I see in the chat too, like people have cars, right? So if you don't have a car, you're not a person, kind of mentality. That
Yeah,
that
for
this is
sure.
the kind of thing that this is the headspace of a lot of counselors, right? Like that they're appealing to like their constituents who live in the suburbs and who don't think beyond their front lawn, as again, I'm kind of paraphrasing what's being said in the chat here too, which is frustrating,
Yeah.
right? Like it's so frustrating because that's I'm very, very lucky that I live downtown. I can walk to the grocery store, I can walk to the work, I can bike up and down the trail. We haven't even talked about like the approval for lighting that's coming on a lot of the trails. But again,
That's
like
right.
that's for certain, yeah,
An investment for certain people. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, of course I'm happy about more lighting on pathways, but even just to say I'm able-bodied in the sense that I've gone through chemo and
yeah,
have successfully recovered. If I was thinking even myself about 4 months ago, if I didn't have the privilege of having a vehicle and
yeah,
having a partner who is able to take time off work so that they can drive me to and from the hospital, like I would have been in a completely different situation. So it's absurd to me that anyone would have to wait 1 hour for a bus to get home from the hospital,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
From
of all
an
places, yeah,
Yeah, right. And I'm sure depending on where you live, it's waiting 1 hour to catch a bus to get to the transfer to another bus, and you're looking at a really long trip that is essentially impossible unless you are going to get a helicopter, which some people might wait that long because how else are you going to get to the hospital? It's like and it's really concerning, and I just want Peterborough councillors to wake up and realize that we need to invest in transit. It's not going to look good. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for transit to catch up to a point where people feel confident that they can even depend on it again, right? But we are in currently what experts call a death spiral, where it's like, oh, well, we need to defund transit and look at people, less people are using it, so we should invest less in it. And oh, even more, less people are using it. And it's like, okay, yeah, of course, less people are using it because you keep like you stopped investing in it so long ago, and you failed to even keep up with the minimum of what the status quo, which was already bad, right? And of course, so you know, I I feel like nothing is going to change, and that's frustrating. But at the same time, I feel like it's something that we need to call out, and we need to think about even the next election, because if these counselors aren't going to be doing anything on it, you know, maybe lucky for them, I was in chemotherapy when the election was happening. But I think where I'm at right now is like I think we just have to start knocking on doors, because creating this podcast and trying to pressure the existing counselors into creating a better Peterborough is not something that I realistically see moving forward. So I don't know. I think it's going to take door knocking, and talking to people, talking to voters to actually make any change in this community. Now, just so it's not misconstrued, that doesn't mean I'm running, but I would knock on doors on behalf of people who I think are capable of making change in our community.
I was going to say that would be a very early announcement, but an exciting one. It'll give you a lot of time to plan and prepare.
Yeah, I'm announcing early. Like basically the day the last election was over, I would be announcing. But you know,
That's beautiful. It's deeply like American to like announce immediately after an election.
that's right. You know,
Yeah.
a 4-year campaign.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. I just think like change is not on the horizon, and that is
No.
kind of disheartening for Peterborough. You know, so I'm kind of just getting my telescope out here and looking off into the distant future and thinking like, damn, it's going to be a while before Peterborough gets the necessary even direction that it needs. And I know even once we shift the directions into something more positive, it's going to take a time to feel the effects of that change as well. So we're a long way away.
Yeah. And like having Alex on last week kind of put it in perspective too. Like there is some, and every once in a while you can kind of feel like something actually kind of not shifting in a sense of like things are changing right now, but like there's a sense of the conversations at City Hall that are happening are a little bit different, right? And like that's
Yeah.
like the beginning. It's like the bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
So there is that ethos, but there needs to be, you know, a lot more of it, more than like the 2 or 3 counselors, depending on the night, that are willing to, you know, openly support progressive policies at the
Right.
municipal level, right? Because it's not happening at a large enough scale at this point. And yeah, you know, I love Peterborough. I want it to be better. You know, I don't. I think if you love
Yeah.
something, you just want it to be better. You want it to be as good as it can be. Not necessarily better. That might be the wrong way to put it, but I think Peterborough can be better. And if you love something, you want it to be the best that it can be. And it's, you know, that's not going to happen
Absolutely.
with people
Like I
waiting
feel
for
like
an
I
hour at the
have,
hospital.
yeah. And I feel like I have a vision. I have hope for Peterborough, you know? And I'm like, I see the potential.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to me that I'm like, why don't we move in this direction? That like I feel like I can see it right there. And as someone is saying in chat, best city in Ontario. And I genuinely think that it has the potential to be, right? But there's a certain lack of leadership that it, it 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 won't be so long as it's moving in this kind of stagnant direction. And even the business class is unhappy. That is like the real indication. Like all counselors do is kind of like pander to these business class folks, and even they are like, what are you doing? Like we still, even this kind of, it also reminds me of when like the police were like, hey, could you please like like keep the overflow shelter running and like
Right?
basically
Yeah.
invest in something that's not police. Like you very rarely hear the police advocate for that. And it was like, yeah, even the people who are like directly benefit from council all the time are like, hey, could you do something about this, because like you're making all of our lives harder. So it is I think, maybe the lack of leadership that we've seen will motivate change in the next election. That is kind of like my only hope. um Anyways, moving on. I feel like these rants are good though. I feel like it's kind of like venting some of the frustration that we have experienced just covering these issues as well though. So
Yeah.
in other
No, it's
news, I
wonderful.
guess, we have Peterborough apartment building has been given the go ahead. Now, this is something we've also talked about in recent weeks. The building on 539 George Street. So where the former Vinnie's secondhand store used to be located.
Yeah, so that's going through.
That's going through. I guess that is that all there is to say about this. Is
Yeah.
yeah, the case city planning staff said that the downtown is walkable. Do you think this is a move to make 15-minute walkable cities? Uh,
I think
here
that's
in
Jeff
Ontario?
Leal's. Yeah, that's Jeff Leal's real agenda here is the 15-minute cities. We can just put that in the minds of
That's
the
right.
conspiracy theorists who are tuning into our deeply leftist podcast.
Yes. George Soros funded Jeff Leal.
Yeah, government
Trying to
funded, George Soros funded. We're funded by students. We're funded by all the bad people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But yeah, no, this is yeah, there was no discussion on this at council. Obviously, like
Okay.
when it came to general committee, there was a lot of discourse about specifically from Keith Riel, who told city staff to go and quote unquote do their jobs and come back with something he can get behind
That's
um,
right.
regarding parking. Um, so this passed with no discussion. It was just it's going to happen. There were some changes to the original wording of the motion just based on the fact that the official plan had come back.
Yeah.
So originally there and I don't know the exact things that had been changed off the top of my head. I probably have a note of them somewhere, but more or less it's just recognizing the fact that the official plan doesn't need to be changed because of the changes that were made to the um like the parts of the original motion making this go through were rendered moot as a result of the official plan coming back from the province. But yeah,
Right.
so it looks like, and I see that Joelle's been doing some reporting on the fact that this could be starting as soon as this summer, following that it's yeah, it's approval by council, which is great. I didn't speak to Simon at ZZY Properties, and I'm blank. I think it was his name was Dennis. I spoke to him, someone from the property group, and I was going to write something about this, and then I never got around to it. But I have something brewing on that, tracing the trajectory of this. I'm just kind of ensuring like what do they consider affordable? I mean, part of the thing that came up is that they've readjusted the plan so that uh, there's going to be more single unit or bachelor units within this apartment. So there's more units with the same like residential space, I guess you could say.
Right.
Um, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. And what, yeah, it's a great question. Like, what is affordable? They're saying 20% of this building is going to be affordable. Um, and yeah, someone is saying affordable but bachelors. It's like, well, but so it's where I would have to guess at least $1,000 for a bachelor apartment in one of these condos. Um, I don't know. It's a big question about what is affordable, because we know even the the cost of living has skyrocketed in recent years. What was even once considered a living wage is not a living wage, and there's all these kind of like misnomers around this, what is affordable and what is a living wage. So I'm definitely concerned about that. Like, there's minimum wage, there's a living wage, there's affordable, but also to who. Is it going to be students who are on OSAP money, or is it going to be affordable for people who have moved here from Toronto? And is it going to be affordable to someone working a full-time job making minimum wage? Somehow I kind of doubt it, because that's not how the world really operates anymore. So, someone also saying $1,000 is not affordable for somebody on ODSP, right? So,
Yep.
or who is employed, and yeah, totally agree. So, again, something I like to see. We need more housing. We need more medium density buildings like this. But is it enough? Is it enough? And I worry. I have a certain skepticism when it comes to solutions that are like, okay, wealthy developers have agreed to this, and they will be largely the ones benefiting from it. What I would
Yep.
also like to see is, to tax the developers who are building this, and use that money to invest in transit.
I love it
That
because
is
there's gonna be no parking spots, so people are gonna have to not have cars. So
right, right.
yeah,
And of course, taxing them in a way, making sure that they can't pass that that price on to the people who are renting the building as well. Largely, this is what I have seen from people in Toronto or major city centers are saying kind of needs to happen. Is like, we need to tax the people who benefit from having transit exist. And you know who really benefits from all that? The person who ends up owning this apartment building without any parking. Because the incentive for people to live there then becomes, oh, fantastic access to public transit.
yeah.
All right, lastly for today. Oh wait, not lastly. We got two more things. The trail lighting on Rotary Trail. We're gonna have lighting, and it's expected to cost $1.7 million. So I'm definitely in favor of stuff like this. I like to see well lit trails. I like to see green space become more accessible to folks. $390,000 will be covered by the federal government, through the Active Transportation Fund, which is great, and the remaining 1.7 million, sorry, after the almost 400,000 from the federal grant, will be coming from community fundraising for $50,000 and from city money budgeted for capital projects. So still quite a lot of that is coming from the city itself. Um, I'm not sure that it is the best use of that money is to have trail lighting. I guess when we have things like that are, I consider essential, like transit being kind of underfunded, um, then I am worried that maybe this isn't the most pressing issue. I do wonder, are they simply spending that money because they know that they will also get the money from the province and the federal government?
Yeah.
Like, is it that they have to spend their own money in order to get the more money? That it seems to be the incentive here.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I'm pretty sure that that's the impetus behind spending the money on this. And also, I mean, I imagine too, um, you know, like a deeply sort of nefarious reading of this is like people who are forced to live in tents along trails. Um, like it's kind of becomes like almost like a hostile infrastructure. Like they installed a light in the middle of Victoria Park here that flashes all night.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that if somebody is like trying to sleep in the park, that they will be discouraged?
yeah. I mean, I can't see another reason why something would flash all night. But like all this to say, like it's making it like into a space that is more easily surveilled, but also more usable for people who can use it for recreational purposes, right? So
Uh,
there's like this twisted
no, you're
logic that
probably
I can
right.
always kind of see, like the nefarious sort of undercurrent of displacement which occurs when
Yes.
ultimately like a form of like urban gentrification kind of.
It's like the bike path on Bethune Street,
Yes, yeah,
which is, if you don't know, the intersection of like Hunter and Bethune around there, tends to be a place where a lot of people solicit sex work, and they've worked really hard to turn it into a bike path, um, which you can imagine why. It's like, are we really only going to get these like functional urban designs as a way to discourage um, sex workers and unhoused folks? Is that really the only
yeah,
motive behind our urbanization of Peterborough?
yeah. I mean,
That's
that's
pretty
my
disappointing.
yeah, that's my deeply like pessimistic take. I mean, I'm not 100% sure like when the lights will exactly be on, if they'll like just shut off at a certain point throughout the night. But I
Yeah,
find it like the people who like I don't know. You know, I frequently walk on trails at night because I'm, you know, privileged enough to do so. I feel like, and you know, I'm very often like the only person out there doing it,
yeah.
except for people who are like living alongside the trails. So I don't know. It seems like a I'm a bit of it's a very pessimistic take on this, but you know,
No, you're probably right. I'm currently being reminded of Mark Saunders' campaign. He's the former police chief of Toronto, and the one thing that I didn't really mind as part of his advertising for his campaign was that he was talking about trail lighting or more lighting. And now I'm kind of like piecing together all the pieces that really, when we're talking about lighting in public places, we are talking about safety, in a sense that liberal suburban people might feel unsafe in these places. And I'm tying it all together now with this kind of virtue signaling towards like creating safe spaces, which comes hand in hand with fear mongering that you're not safe, and the
yeah,
reason you're not safe is because there are people living in poverty who are out there and who are desperate, and instead of using that money to help lift them out of poverty and get them housing, we're using it to make you feel safe, in places where you barely ever frequent anyways.
yeah. And like I don't want to discount the fact that this is going to make trails like more safe and make people feel more safe on trails at night, because I
Yeah,
think that they're an important route to take, but they're also bearing in mind like they're not the only route to take home, right? Like
for
I'm
sure, for
you
sure.
know, yeah,
It's like we've got lighting now for people who probably own cars
yeah, yeah.
and drive home.
For,
Like,
yeah, for your or take they wouldn't be taking transit home, but they'd be taking like a taxi home or something like that. And it's like
yeah,
I don't know how many people are going for, you know, jaunty bike rides at like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, as a matter of like for
yeah,
recreational or exercise purposes. Um, you know,
for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like, hey, this would be good if we had already addressed like 10 other more important issues
exactly. So
ahead of it, like
yeah,
I legitimately wish we were at a point in Peterborough where we can be like, yeah, hey, like this another great infrastructure project that is
right.
making the green space more accessible to people, but it's
Yeah,
like, damn, we're so far away from counting this as a victory, I think.
yeah,
um
yeah. No, and
so okay.
it gets right back to what you initially said. It's like this is great, except there's probably ways in which this money could be, you know. Anyways, this
Yeah,
took
for
a
sure.
yeah, I just can't help but be, you know, deeply cynical of these kinds of things, while also like being able to hold like two simultaneous truths, you know, that it is beneficial for certain people and that it will make the trail safer and more accessible for some people, but at the same time
Yeah,
it's going to like increase, you know, the visibility of people who, you know, are who have been disenfranchised by the very system that we're now kind of flaunting, you know.
Yeah, and I think that is the difficult part about our jobs, you could say, is like you kind of do have to parse through these things, and things that appear as though they're like a great thing on the outside. Unfortunately, sometimes there's like some reasons why they're not as good as they claim to be. So I think, you know what, I'm just proud of us. I'm just proud of us being able to have the nuance to thread this needle here.
We're doing our best here, you know.
We are doing our best, yeah. We are just two dudes who get together every week and do our best.
Yeah, we're just two dudes with a podcast, you know. It's
That's right. The last thing that we have to talk about today is kind of really disheartening news. Something that I'm not really happy to say that Peterborough can be top of its field in. Peterborough has had the second highest rate of human trafficking cases in Canada's census metropolitan areas in 2021, and the third highest rate of cases for the period of 2011 to 2021, according to Stats Canada. So, in a nutshell, Peterborough has the second highest rate of human trafficking cases in Canada, and that is horrible to hear. Horrible to know that this is something that is going on here. So in 2021 alone, there was 14 cases of human trafficking, a rate of 10.9 cases per 100,000 people, and had 50 total cases for the 10-year period from 2011 to 2021, a rate of 3.6 cases per 100,000 people. Not really, horrible news. It's something that I don't really know what needs to be done or why it's specifically happening here in Peterborough. The places that are ahead of us are in this horrible statistic are Halifax and Thunder Bay. And MP Michelle Ferreri attributed the high cases of it here in Peterborough having to do with us being the corridor, kind of like the place between, I guess, the GTA and the boonies.
Yeah. In terms of like the way in which we're like kind of located off of the 401 as well, and it's just kind of like a sort of a meeting place in the middle of larger urban centers as well. And then also the article really talks about the fact that the people who are most at risk of this are specifically Indigenous and racialized women and girls and two-spirit LGBTQ people. And given Peterborough's sort of being in the middle of many First Nations communities as well, that's likely a contributing factor to this as well, unfortunately. That just the extreme disproportionate rates of wherein Indigenous women and girls find themselves caught up in what is a heinous crime,
Yeah.
and situation. We talked a lot about like the sheer deprivation of like humanity and stuff, and I think human trafficking is like it's a very explicit manifestation of that, and we can't exactly separate this from things that we've talked about earlier in the podcast as well, with the ongoing issues having to do with poverty, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and inaccessibility, and addictions, right? Like all of these things are tied up in into this issue as well. So
Yeah.
lots of contributing factors to kind of, I mean, we said, Peterborough, I think I saw it in the chat, Peterborough is the best city in Ontario. Well, it's there's a lot of work, because this is like you said too, like this is not where we want to find ourselves. This is not a statistic that reflects very well on any any facet of the population in Peterborough. This is
Yeah.
yeah,
And even just to touch on the last issue, how there's this kind of like urbanization that is meant to further disenfranchise people who are unhoused. That the lack of humanity when it comes to being like, oh well, we're already doing enough to save people who are overdosing, even, and it all, yeah, I think it all ties into each other in a way. This is the perfect way to kind of wrap up this episode, because it really goes to show the kind of like lack of humanity that maybe our current city council is operating with. And this is something I think they especially should be forced to reconcile with, because it is essentially their responsibility to pull us out of this statistic. And when I think about the intersection of indigenous folks, racialized folks, unhoused folks, folks with substance abuse problems, what solution does not come to my mind is like, hey, what if we policed these people even more?
hmm
Like, is police really the answer to this problem? If we think about the people who are being most affected by this, um largely they are not communities that are friends of the police, or vice versa. So I think there needs to be a holistic kind of approach to like improving the quality of life in Peterborough. There's going to be a large trend right now as part of the Ford government removing the barrier of having post-secondary education in order to go to police college. And a lot of people, I think, right now are kind of clutching their pearls and thinking to themselves, we need to make our streets safer, because and the way to do that is going to be more, as Doug Ford and his colleagues are putting it, boots on the ground, right? And at the end of the day, there is no greater illustration to me that we are in the middle of a class war, and the upper class is literally putting boots on the ground to police us, and that is going to be their solution. But it's really important for us, I think, to also be coming up with our own solutions. And unfortunately, I'm not sure we're going to get any help from our elected politicians, and certainly the ones that do want to help, whether it's in Peterborough City Council or at the provincial level, are essentially powerless to do so. So the thing we're doing right now, I think, is just trying to be loud and get organized for when there actually is some power in place for us to make those systemic changes.
absolutely. Yeah, no, really well said there. Because yeah, more cops is not going to solve human trafficking crises. Addressing the root causes and why people find themselves in situations where they become where they be, end up in situations where they are so vulnerable that they fall into these cycles. Addressing that and making sure that is stopped, is what has to happen. Again, like we can celebrate the things like path, to a certain degree, while also maintaining like a critical distance from it, being like, well, this is good for people, but what who are currently experiencing housing insecurity, but what is actually being done to prevent people from falling from ending up in a situation.
Yeah,
um you know it's because all you're going to end up doing is like having to create more and more and more tiny homes, right? Right. The situations, tiny homes are not like the be all end all. People need
yeah,
you know autonomy and the ability to live a life that you know isn't wholly dependent upon the good, like the goodwill of organizations like Path, right?
of course. And I mean, there's so many great organizations in Peterborough who want to be empowered and help us transform our community.
Yeah,
Um, and it's just a matter of getting our priorities straight. And I think one thing that I'm really just cannot emphasize enough for this iteration of city council is the lack of vision. and I would encourage Jeff Leal, who knows if he would ever hear this, but just to like be a visionary, like I'm sure in his prime age, even, like, think about a legacy, think about where you want to leave Peterborough, and are we just going to maintain this status quo, which is a death spiral right now, or are we going to pull out of this spiral and create and make Peterborough the best city in Ontario? Let's actually consider that as a possibility.
Exactly.
And on that note, I
Yeah.
think maybe that's the end of the show. So thank you so much
Yeah. Thank
for
you, Danny.
listening.
Thanks everyone in chat.
Hey, thank you, Sebastian. And
Absolutely. My pleasure.
congratulations again on winning re-election. Thank you everyone in chat for listening for listening. It's always a good time.
Yeah. All right.
We'll
Talk
see
to
you
y'all
next
soon.
week.